Hi, I'm Aaron Raw, and you're watching Atheist Edge.
Hi, welcome to Atheist Edge. I'm Sam.
I'm Mark.
And today the question is, atheists have morality too? Mark and I have prepared a few statements about morality without belief in God. And then I have a few questions for you, Mark. And we want to hear your thoughts and comments below, anything that you want to contribute to this complex topic. Now, it often comes as a surprise to Christians and theists of most stripes that an atheist would have any morality at all. It seems logically absurd from the theistic perspective to think morals are real without a God as ruler and judge of humans. This presumes that the only real consequences are in the afterlife. It is because consequences are based in this life that morality has any meaning at all. That is the logical basis of morality without a God, reality itself. Knowledge of reality begets knowledge of good and evil. In this sense, morality becomes as complex and as multifaceted as reality itself. It is to be discovered, learned, taught, and turned into culture. But morality doesn't arise on its own from the conditions of reality. It requires human life to have any meaning. Murder, theft, rape have no meaning without human life. And without a goal, morality has no meaning. Some might ask, without God, how can we know if any goal is good? Upon what do we know if a goal is good at all? Isn't it circular reasoning to say that a goal is good because it achieves a good end? Isn't that begging the question of what defines good in the first place? This is why some have said that there is no such thing as good and evil. I happen to disagree. Good is what furthers human life, and bad is what ends human life. But why value human life, you might ask? Is that again begging the question? No, here's why. Try living without valuing your life. Reality will soon end it for you. Morality concerns human choices within reality. The nature of the choices available depend on the nature of reality and the nature of man, some of which we can control, some of it we can't. If you don't want to live, if you want to live, value your life. If you don't want to live, don't value your life. The good news is that most people do value their life. The ones that don't are weeded out. And we learn more and more about what it is to be moral as we learn more and more about the nature of reality and human beings. And Mark, I'll let you take it away.
Well, Sam's talked about one theory of morality that's outside of the divine. There are others. The belief in morality in atheists varies. Atheism means one thing, lack of a belief in God. We all disagree quite a bit on most other subjects. Some atheists even deny that there is objective morality. They claim it is purely subjective, merely a whim, perhaps either based on the individual belief or the beliefs of society. Most systems of morality outside of the divine, or the secular versions, are what's called consequentialism. It's a belief in morality based on the consequences of your action. Many theists will claim that consequentialism is limited because you never know for sure the results of any particular action. You may save a life, and then that life turns out to kill many people. So what would appear to be a good action may later have negative consequences. While that's true, I would point out that we live our lives always trying to maximize potential goodness and trying to reduce our liability or mitigate our risk. And even though we're not always perfect, we still live our lives that way. And we, looking at the past 2,000 years, we've made some pretty good progress. While Sam, you're talking a lot about the actual theoretical underpinnings, the philosophic underpinnings of morality in religion. Something I'm always interested in is the constant question is, well, you're an atheist, where do you get your values? Mm-hmm. And rather than actually saying we get them based on human nature and whatnot, something I like to look at is how we do actually accumulate them. And what it seems to me is we get them generally from the same place Christians do. We get them from our parents. We get them from our society. We get them from our peers that reinforce them. If you're a theist and you claim, no, all morality comes from the Bible, let's do a thought experiment. Let's imagine a child with literally no moral sense being brought to a Sunday school. How can the child learn? He will not know to let the teacher speak. He will not know to not assault the other students. He will not know to just be a general pain in the butt. You have to have a certain amount of morality generally instilled at your parents' knee before you can move on and learn these more advanced concepts. If we look at the history of Christianity and their morality, we can see some examples of where, rather than Christianity really driving morality, society drives morality and is actually changing Christianity. Some examples are slavery, the treatment of women, and racism. For most of the history of Christianity, slavery was considered a good. It was considered a moral good. It was considered good for the slaves. Very often, our relationship with God was compared to that of a master and a slave, that we owe the same allegiance to God that we owe to our master. This strikes me as a little odd because if I were a slave, my thoughts would be we should destroy our master and become free. But this is the idea that the Bible used. But as society has evolved, 2,000 years later, we find virtually no religion that claims slavery is still a positive good. Even the Southern Baptist Convention, who were basically created in the 1830s and 1840s to help support Southern slavery, even they have now denounced this. As recently as 1995, they finally admitted that their racist roots were immoral. I don't see where they really reevaluated their biblical stance and then came out to say this, but rather the other way around. They recognized that the greater society had evolved, and they had to begin reinterpreting the Bible to make the Bible match with contemporary morals. They do this not only with slavery and racism, but also with women's rights. And it's remarkably similar, in my opinion, to what we're seeing in same-sex marriage. I recall when I was a child, interracial marriage was taboo. In fact, if you go as little as 15 years before my birth, interracial marriage was actually illegal. And you could be put in jail for up to 2 years for marrying a person of a different race. This is still practiced in some churches. Recently, in the past couple of years, there was a church in Mississippi where the pastor refused to marry an interracial couple. But that is so abhorrent that pastor actually lost his job over it. The congregation as a whole didn't agree with that particular pastor. And so Christianity has changed based on society's changes. It's rare that a Christian will recognize that their interpretation of the Bible is influenced by society. That in practice, they believe that they are driving society, but it really seems the opposite to me. It seems that religion is always trying to catch up. In a lot of ways, we're hoping that certain forms of Islam will catch up to us as well, and they'll recognize that the use of violence is not the best practice. But once again, it's just something that society has got to drive, rather than their religion.
So overall, you would be one who would claim that society decides morals, that the origin of morality comes from society?
Well, I would argue that the morals that we ought adhere to, and the ones that we do in fact adhere to, come from society more than any sort of theoretical underpinning. Because most of your moral ideas, and I'm talking about the simple ones, not to steal, not to murder, not to bully other people, they're things that you learn way before you learn about the concept of epistemology or metaphysics, or that you've even heard the term ethics. It is rare that those most basic of moral precepts changes with age. It's very rare that someone that perhaps grows up thinking slavery is wrong becomes a Christian and then decides the Holy Book tells me I should own slaves, so I'll begin doing that. There's almost a sense of repugnance, a sense of almost visceral dislike for the immoral. And it's my belief from observation that most of that is based on what we're just taught by our parents.
If generally a society where most people within a society are Christian and somebody's parents are Christian, then would it be fair to say that, especially in Western culture, much of our morals and values do in fact come from the Bible because it's taught on Sundays, it's preached there. Western culture has a long tradition of having the Bible in the home, at least since the printing press. 16, 17, 1800s, religious iconography, crosses, and it's something that is discussed and seems to be a part of people's lives. So would you say that the Bible plays a part in forming that?
Well, we can observe the Bible being taught in Sunday schools as a positive moral lesson. There are typically, oriented towards the younger generation, very simple morality tales of things, involving typically not stealing, not murdering. However, a lot of Bible tales we will find that are taught in Sunday schools have a great deal to do obedience and adherence to authority. Stories such as Noah, and he's commanded to build this ark, which seems an irrational act, but he does it. Other people who are told to kill their children, and then later God says, oh, don't do it. There are a lot of morality tales in Christianity which we no longer find morally acceptable. Also, of course, morality did exist prior to the Bible, as you know. That the Bible was merely a way to codify some of these rules, but it should be fairly obvious before the Ten Commandments existed that in Egypt you could still steal things. You could still murder people. Even though God had not given us the Ten Commandments of yet, we still knew these things were immoral. And the Ten Commandments was just simply somebody writing them down for the first time, along with some other commandments in that particular list, which might really not have much to do with morality, but more having to do with maintaining order in society. Have no gods before me. Do not worship other gods. Things that are going to help promote unity in society.
So, one of the interesting things about that, though, is because in Western culture, Christianity and the Bible has had such a dominant influence, wouldn't that mean that Christians and atheists, no matter what religion, just because it's so predominant and it has been going on for thousands of years, that it informs the content, the moral sentiment that is passed around socially?
Well, we can certainly see the Bible doing that. But the interesting thing is it's not so much the Bible doing it as interpretations of the Bible. 200 years ago, Southern Baptists would say the Bible plainly says slavery is moral. Not only is slavery moral, it's a morally uplifting and useful thing. It's necessary for the slave and it's necessary for the master. In fact, masters are sometimes talked about having great responsibility for their slaves. From my reading of the Bible, that's a perfectly understandable and legitimate interpretation. However, you're going to find virtually no one today who will say that slavery is okay according to the Bible. They're going to couch it in other terms. Well, slavery was different then. Slavery was much more like a situation between an employer and an employee will be their claim. Of course, it is illegal to murder your employees. It's illegal to beat your employees. You can't generally sell your employees' children to another owner.
Right.
So it's plainly changed as time has gone by. It might be that the Bible does give us some morality, but the important thing is how that Bible is interpreted.
Understood. Now, are political systems the only mechanisms that form society?
That's not my belief. You can plainly have other social systems outside of politics. Many of us ignore politics as much as we can, despite the danger that might pose to you. We have social systems from schools, whether private or public, voluntary associations of people in interests, based on interest, a stamp collecting club or a homebrew club. There's also religious organizations that can help promote social unity.
So basically, there are many overlapping areas in which morals take place within a society and form. You've got your religious side, your political side, economics, banking, family. Is that fair to say?
I would say so. To my mind, the question of morality, many people see morality as their enemy. What are their restrictions? What can they not do? To me, morality answers the question, what ought I do? And that's it at every moment. As I'm sitting here, should I continue this interview and talking about religion? Should I leave? Should I talk about another subject? All of these things are really moral decisions. What ought I do? And so absolutely, morality is going to infuse every single aspect of working with other people, also by yourself. What should I do with this time that I have alone? Should I study and become a better person? Should I engage in alcohol? Should I just waste my time watching television? All of that is moral decision.
Gotcha. Now, are Christian morals, are they good or bad?
In my opinion, it depends on the particular moral. Plainly, a commandment like thou shalt not murder is certainly a legitimate commandment. But then a commandment to let not ye be yoked with unbelievers just promotes disunity. It's an idea that says that basically Christians and non-believers shouldn't be connected in some way. If Christians fully adhered to this, you would have to have Christian-only companies, Christian-only fire departments, police departments, all uniquely Christian, but plainly we don't do that, and I don't think anyone would say it's a good idea.
Gotcha. Now, so there's some things about Christian morals that you consider good and some that you consider bad. You gave some examples of both. Now, upon what do you make such determinations of good or bad?
Well, that would be whether something is a Christian moral is good or bad would of course go down to whether it adheres to the moral code that I believe in, which is a slightly different subject than really what I was talking about. And each of us are going to do that. It's interesting that Christians themselves, rather than saying that their moral code is incorrect, will simply reinterpret it to say that the Bible never said that at all. An interpretation today in Christianity is that the Bible never said slavery was moral. It has always held slavery to be immoral, and the people over the past 2,000 years were just wrong in interpreting it. Only today do we have the correct interpretation, is what a Christian would say.
So you said it was basically your belief that determines your basis of morality. Am I misunderstanding that?
Well, I'm talking more about what I believe to be moral rather than what is actually moral, because I recognize that I can make mistakes in morality, and merely because I believe something is moral does not make it so. And for that reason, I believe in an objective moral sense rather than a purely subjective one where I'm the ultimate arbiter.
Gotcha.
Although we all have to make those decisions on our own.
So you do say that there is an objective component to morality. Is that fair to say?
That does seem correct to me. If you accept something where morality is based merely on social or even legal precepts, then you have the unusual situations where you have to say, well, the Holocaust was good in the 1930s. It was legal, it was what the people wanted, and so it was a moral good thing. No one today would say that except people that are strictly moral relativists that believe morality is based on societal norms completely.
So Does objective morality change, or is it absolute, or is it just that our knowledge of objective morality changes?
Well, being objective, it would never change. However, our knowledge of it would plainly change. It's something that we are constantly discovering as we discover new aspects of our human nature. For example, you could claim that murder has always been immoral, but if we ever reach a level of medical science where it's literally impossible for you to die, murder would be inconsequential. It would be perhaps as significant as me
Sneezing.
yeah, something like that. If death is not the true consequence of it, the fact that I attempt to kill you is sort of irrelevant, and so the rule would become purposeless.
Okay, and I think I get what you're saying.
So
Now,
it would change based on human nature. If human nature manages to change, morals would change as well, in my opinion.
Gotcha. Is it possible that our changing knowledge of reality is the basis for the seemingly unabsolute nature of reality? Unabsolute nature of morality?
Yeah, I would think so. A good example is the one I just gave. That if human immortality was achieved, then murder would be impossible, and therefore the rule against it would be superfluous and nonsensical, as though saying it's immoral to snap your fingers and cause the world to stop existing. Not really, because
You can't do it.
yeah.
Right. Now, what is the point of morality?
Well, if you believe morality is a guide for your own actions, then that is the point. It tells you what to do, what not to do. If your morality can be socially useful, it will help society, people get along together. If I'm not violating your rights, you're not violating mine, the odds are we'll live in society without conflict, much greater than if we have contrasting morals where we each believe that we should steal from each other constantly, for example.
Now, kind of shifting gears a little bit, why should any given human being value their own individual well-being? Is there a reason why they ought to value their own individual well-being without a deity?
Well, that's an interesting question. You could certainly say it depends on the individual. If a person is perhaps born who finds they have sociopathic tendencies, who find they have no moral center, who find, yeah, murdering people, that's good stuff, I enjoy that. Perhaps, let's see, what exactly is the nature of the question?
Why should any given human being value their own individual
Perhaps
well-being?
that one very sick individual might not have a really good, valid reason to value themselves, because they are really negative, bad, perhaps they're really unhappy in their own existence. But for most of us, it does seem that valuing your own well-being is an important component to being successul in life. And only if you're successful in life can you, even if you adhere to a sort of secular humanism where you believe that the good of others is the primary good, you have to have a certain degree of self-competence and self-belief in order to be a good actor for others. Even if you are completely altruistic in your outlook, you have to have a basis. You can't go build homes for the homeless if you don't have enough calories.
Right. Now, this one's a little tricky. Is it your responsibility to care for someone who doesn't value their own well-being?
Well, if we look at the ethics of emergencies, very often someone who does not value their own well-being does so because of a temporary reason. Perhaps they're experiencing pronounced grief. perhaps they are experiencing a chemical imbalance, and they're attempting to do self-harm. We as a society have traditionally said those people should be protected from themselves. One case might be drug abuse, that even if a person is overdosing on heroin, we make the assumption that they would like to continue to live, and we take them to an ER, give them drugs to try to counteract that. And so we will, against their own wishes, often spend extraordinary costs to try to save that person from themselves, even when they don't value themselves. We'll even offer, in some circumstances, rehabilitation to try to bring them back.
Now, going even broader here, is there such a thing as duty or responsibility in objective terms without God?
You can certainly impose a duty upon yourself. Members of the military and law enforcement, they will swear an oath promising to do certain things. And that is a voluntary duty, a voluntary promise that they've undertaken. And it would seem to me that if you make such a voluntary commitment, that why not keep that?
So would it be fair to say that what undergirds duty and responsibility is your free choice? That it only comes from that? Would it also be false to say that there's a duty outside of you that's forcing you to do something beyond what you agreed?
Well, different moral systems would have different answers to that. My personal morality, do I hold it that it's necessary for me to help my fellow man? While I don't hold it's a duty, I do find that a cooperative society does seem to be a much better one to live in. So it is still voluntary. We are all stuck together, so
yeah, can't control that too much.
Yeah, well, you can find some very sparsely populated regions, and you can live as a virtual hermit. But personally, I believe living in society gives you much more benefits than merely a sort of abstract sense of freedom that I'm free to do anything I want. Well,
for instance, hot hamburgers on demand.
Hot hamburgers, perhaps medical care, perhaps entertainment, perhaps
gasoline,
social intercourse.
Is there such a thing as justice?
What's our definition of justice? Justice would seem to be adherence to moral principles.
What I've found with justice, I'm thinking about, like, in legal terms, balancing the scale. Someone wrongs someone else, and the idea of justice is that the person who is wronged, restitution is made to in one form or another. Taking a really extreme example is, someone who murders somebody else. Justice, one idea of justice would be that they would lose their life too.
Well, another sense, perhaps, I can see where there's some cases where you cannot right certain injustices. For example, in the case of taking a life, currently we're not immortal, and there's no way to restore that life. So regardless of what we do to the individual that performs a murder, whether we lock them up, we kill them, we kill their entire family, none of these things are going to bring that person back. And so, in a sense, there will be a unjust act that occurred that cannot be corrected. Some types of justice can exist. I scratch your car pulling out, and it costs $100 to repair. Showing my age, it costs $1,000 to repair. I give you $1,000. We're more or less equal.
Gotcha. If so, is the God of the Bible immoral?
That depends on your belief in God himself. If you believe that God actually does exist, and that what God does is moral by default, then of course he's moral. He cannot be immoral. It's an impossibility. However, if you don't believe in the God of the Bible and you judge his actions based on either a secular humanist or perhaps even a belief from some other religion, in my opinion, he's very immoral. Just the example of Noah, he killed many, many children in the Great Flood. And something I would point out to people who are anti-abortion, he performed a lot of abortions that day. So it does seem that God is okay in some instances with killing children.
Right, right. At least according to the Bible. According to the Bible. One last question here. If there is no God, isn't it more important than ever to make good choices that further your well-being?
Never considered that question. If there's no God, is it more important? Well, if there's no God, there's no one to watch out for you. There's likely no afterlife. So it would seem that making good choices is very important because this is the only life we lead and the only opportunity for any happiness or fulfillment we get. It's not going to be in the afterlife, so it would need to be based on decisions we make in the here and now, based on reality.
That's a great conclusion. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mark, for coming in to Atheist Edge.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Absolutely. And we'll see you next time. Cheers.
Bye-bye.